Usually when we look at history, there's this expectation of clarity. Like, you look in the rearview mirror and the events are fixed.
Right, the dates are set in stone.
Exactly. The timeline is clearly marked out for you.
Yeah.
But when you flip that perspective, when you look at how people in the past tried to look forward, that clear mirror just kind of shatters.
It completely shatters. It turns into a kaleidoscope, really.
Yeah, it does. We find ourselves staring into this prophetic landscape that is, honestly, it's incredibly murky. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking excerpts from the complete prophecies of Nostradamus. But we are doing it with a really fascinating twist today.
A very specific lens.
Right. We aren't just looking at a 16th century French astrologer writing these cryptic poems. We're actually examining the 1947 edition, which was translated and interpreted by a guy named Henry C. Roberts.
And that 1947 publication date, I mean, it completely changes the context of what we're reading here.
Oh, totally.
Because Roberts is putting this edition together in the immediate, deeply traumatized aftermath of World War II.
Yeah, the ink is basically barely dry on the surrender document.
Exactly. The world has just witnessed the dawn of the atomic age, and society is just reeling from an unprecedented level of mechanized destruction.
Right.
So when you read Robert's interpretations, you aren't just reading Nostradamus. You are watching a 20th century occultist use centuries-old verses to basically make sense of D-Day, fascism, and just global devastation.
It's wild. And whether you are, a hardened skeptic who rolls your eyes at astrology, or maybe you're someone who firmly believes in prophecy, the sources we have in front of us today, they offer this incredible look at human psychology.
They really do.
It reflects our universal, almost desperate desire to predict the future, to find some kind of order in all the chaos.
Yeah, humans are desperate for patterns.
You really are.
Yeah.
But before we can get into how Roberts applied these ancient prophecies to tanks and airplanes, we got to establish the baseline.
Right, the setup.
We have to look at how Nostradamus claimed to receive these visions in the first place. So we're shifting from the 1947 editor's intro straight into Nostradamus' own words. Specifically, we have his preface.
Which is such a fascinating document.
It is. It's written as this deeply personal letter of dedication to his infant son, Caesar.
Yeah, and in that letter, Nostradamus lays out his methodology. He claims his visions are this synthesis of two very different disciplines.
Right.
On one hand, he points to complex astronomical calculations, charting the stars, tracking celestial movement.
The math side of it.
Exactly, the math. But on the other hand, he claims direct divine inspiration. He describes a highly ritualized, incredibly physical method for receiving these visions.
Very theatrical.
Very. And he outlines it in the very first two quatrains of Century First. He paints this vivid picture of himself sitting entirely alone at night in a secret study.
Spooky.
Right. And he says he rests his hands over a brass tripod. He holds a divining rod, which Roberts notes in his commentary is similar to a forked rod, historically used for dowsing.
Like finding underground water.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
And then he takes it a step further with all these sensory details. He has this brass bowl filled with water, meticulously marked off into segments.
Right, and he writes about wetting his limb and his foot in this water.
Which is such an oddly specific detail.
It really is. And then he just waits in total darkness. He writes that eventually a slender flame leaps out of the solitude.
Yeah, the slender flame.
And once that flame appears, he says he is met with a heavenly splendor in the presence of a divine genius. I mean, it reads like an ancient oracle preparing to receive a message straight from the gods.
Oh, he is deliberately cultivating that ancient mystical image, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
And in that same letter to his infant son, he includes this incredibly dramatic anecdote about his own past. He claims he inherited a vast, dangerous collection of ancient occult magic books.
Of course he did.
Naturally. But he decided they were just too powerful, too corrupting to be left out in the world.
Right.
So he says he presented them to Vulcan, which is his poetic way of saying he threw them into the fire.
Wow.
And as they burned, he describes the flame mixing with the air to create this unwanted, brilliant light, almost like a localized lightning storm, illuminating his entire house.
That is so dramatic.
He claims he burned them to pure ash to prevent anyone from ever abusing that dark knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
Because I really have to express some friendly skepticism here. Nostradamus putting on a grand show of burning his occult books and claiming it was this blinding, mystical fire.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like someone frantically deleting their browser history when they know the authorities are knocking on the front door.
That is a very apt comparison.
Right. Like, if we look at the historical reality, Nostradamus lived right in the middle of the Inquisition. The church was actively hunting down heretics.
Oh, people were literally being burned at the stake.
Exactly. For practicing magic or challenging orthodox theology. So publicly declaring, hey guys, I burned all my magic books and everything I write now is just divine inspiration from God.
Yeah, it's convenient.
It feels like a meticulously crafted PR move just to avoid being executed.
What's fascinating here is that Nostradamus doesn't even try to hide the fact that he's terrified of the authorities.
Really?
Yeah. The text itself essentially validates your suspicion. In that very same letter to Caesar, he drops the mystical persona for a moment and speaks very practically about the danger he's in.
Huh.
He openly admits that he intentionally wrote his prophecies in dark and abstruse sentences.
Oh, so he says it outright.
He does. He tells his son that if he were to plainly state what will happen to the kingdoms, sects, and religions of his present day, the rulers would find it so offensive and disagreeable that they would immediately condemn him.
I mean, he practically spells out his own self-censorship right there.
Exactly.
He writes that he withheld his tongue from the vulgar and his pen from paper, deliberately choosing to enlarge his thoughts in dark sentences so he wouldn't offend the hearers.
Yeah.
He knew exactly what he was doing by making it impossible to read straight.
It is a survival mechanism disguised as mysticism. Deliberate obscurity is literally the only way he can publish these apocalyptic visions without ending up on the wrong side of an inquisitor.
Makes sense.
So he cloaks his predictions in garbled language, shifting animal metaphors, and dense astronomical jargon. By making the text a labyrinth, he ensures no monarch or religious leader can definitively prove he's predicting their downfall.
Which is brilliant if your only goal is staying alive in 16th century France.
Right.
But that survival tactic creates a massive blind spot for anyone trying to read him later. If the original text is a purposeful, shifting puzzle designed to confuse 16th century enemies, anyone translating it 400 years later isn't just reading.
No, they're guessing.
They are forced to project their own meaning into the gaps. And that brings us to what happens when our 20th century interpreter, Henry C. Roberts, attempts to decode these deliberate riddles.
And Roberts just embraces those gaps completely.
Oh, he loves them.
He really does. When he publishes his edition in 1946, he explicitly addresses the confusing nature of the text. In his intro, he states that the broken, incoherent nature of the Quatrains isn't a flaw at all.
He spins it as a positive.
He calls it the hallmark of prophetic media.
Oh.
From Robert's perspective, if the text were too clear, it would be bound to a single era. He believes the garbled, disjointed imagery is precisely what allows the prophecies to transcend time and speak to different generations.
And Roberts leans into that philosophy aggressively. I mean, he takes these vague 400-year-old poems and maps them directly onto the most visceral, traumatic events of his own immediate past.
In order to.
Let's look at the linguistic gymnastics he performs with Quatrain 29.
Oh, this is a great example.
Nostradamus writes about a terrestrial and aquatic fish being cast onto the gravel by a strong wave. It has a strange, horrid form, and soon after, enemies come to the walls by the sea.
So to a 16th century reader, terrestrial and aquatic fish might evoke a literal sea monster washing ashore.
Right, like a myth.
Or perhaps a poetic metaphor for a coastal shipwreck. But Roberts is reading this in 1946. The beaches of Normandy are still scarred.
Yeah.
So Roberts makes an incredible interpretative leap. He maps that terrestrial and aquatic fish directly onto the amphibious tanks and the duck landing craft used by the Allied forces on D-Day.
It's just wild to me.
He takes a 16th century biological metaphor and filters it entirely through the mechanization of modern warfare. The gravel becomes the beaches of France.
And the enemies come into the walls by the sea.
That becomes the Allied invasion of Fortress Europe.
He does something really similar with Quatrain 23, too, where Nostradamus describes a battle in the fields of Mars involving a wild boar and a leopard, and then an eagle playing about the sun swoops in.
Right.
Roberts doesn't see European heraldry or ancient Roman symbols there. He interprets this through the literal alliances of World War II.
Completely.
In Roberts' translation, the boar is Germany, the leopard is England, locked in a dogged fight with the boar, and that eagle swooping in from the sun.
Let me guess, America.
Exactly. That represents America, finally crossing the ocean and joining the fray to turn the tide of the war.
He even finds the legal aftermath of the war buried in the text. Look at how he handles Quatrain 24.
Oh, the trial one.
Yeah. Nostradamus mentions a trial occurring in New City where a bird of prey offers himself to the sky to condemn an idea, and after victory, captives are forgiven.
Right.
Roberts zeroes in on the phrase New City and points out that it phonetically translates to the concept of Nuremberg.
That is such a stretch.
But from there, the entire quatrain snaps into focus for him as a direct forecast of the Nuremberg trials, where the architects of the Nazi regime were judged.
See, I'm going to push back hard here.
Oh, for it.
Isn't this just historical pareidolia, like seeing faces in the clouds? If you have just survived the horrors of World War II, every single vague poem about fire, iron, and a beast from the sea is going to look like a Nazi invasion or a mechanized landing craft. It's the psychological need to find patterns in the noise. Roberts even takes Quatrain 22, which mentions war, ice, and a fragile brute, and insists it is a forecast of supersonic weapons traveling above the stratosphere.
Right. The rockets.
He is taking jet propulsion and trying to cram it into a Renaissance poem about ice. It's too much.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the phenomenon you're describing is exactly how prophecy functions on a societal level.
How so?
It acts as a psychological blank canvas. Roberts isn't decoding Nostradamus in an objective scientific sense. He is projecting the massive, lingering collective trauma of his own era onto ancient verses.
Ah, I see.
The text easily absorbs this projection because of its deliberate obscurity. And you see this projection extending beyond just military technology into profound political anxiety.
Right. The text just becomes a vessel for whatever the interpreter fears most in their own timeline.
Precisely. Nostradamus explicitly mentions in Quatrain 14 that idiots without heads will be received by divine prayers, and a captive, slavish people will petition for songs and books. Roberts reads that in the late 1940s and immediately interprets it as a direct forecast of the Russian Revolution. To Roberts, the idiots without heads are the proletariat overthrowing the aristocracy.
Wow.
The text simply mirrors the ideological battles occupying the mind of the 20th century editor.
So we've pretty much established that a 1940s editor can easily force modern tanks and modern politics into old poems. But, a broken clock is still right twice a day.
Sure.
We have to look at the other side of the coin and ask, did Nostradamus actually get anything undeniably right without requiring massive linguistic leaps?
Right.
Because there is one specific prophecy in these sources that proponents always point to as the ultimate proof.
You are referring to Quatrain 35, which is widely considered his most famous historical hit.
Yeah, that's the one.
And unlike the vague aquatic fish, the imagery here aligns with an actual historical event in an incredibly specific, eerie way.
It really does. The text of Quatrain 35 says, and I'm quoting here, "The young lion shall overcome the old one, in martial field by a single duel. In a golden cage he shall put out his eye, 2 wounds from one, then he shall die a cruel death."
It's chilling.
And this is famous because it perfectly matches the bizarre, tragic death of King Henry II of France, which happened just a few years after Nostradamus published the verse.
Right.
The king, representing the old lion, was jousting in a tournament against a younger Scottish knight.
The young lion.
Yeah. During the tilt, the younger knight's wooden lance splintered. A shard bypassed the king's visor, piercing his golden helmet, which is the golden cage.
Unbelievable.
The wood entered his eye and his brain, causing 2 wounds from one strike, and led to a slow, agonizing, cruel death from infection.
It is a striking alignment. You have the older and younger men, the martial field of the joust, the golden helmet acting as a cage, the specific injury to the eye, and the lingering, cruel death.
It's hard to argue with that one.
It is hits like that jousting prophecy that give the text its enduring mystique and convince readers that there is genuine foresight buried in the riddles. But the dynamic changes entirely when Nostradamus abandons those poetic animal metaphors and starts giving us hard, specific dates for the future.
Right.
Projection works perfectly for vague imagery, but a hard date is a testable hypothesis.
Yeah, when he gives a specific timeline, he totally removes the blank canvas. We can actually fact-check him. And Nostradamus did not shy away from giving hard dates.
No, he did not.
In Quatrain 16, he predicts a climactic, apocalyptic event in the specific year of 1999. He writes that in 1999, accompanied by a celestial alignment involving Sagittarius, a great king of terror will come from the sky.
The king of terror.
He predicts this will bring plague, famine, and death by the military hand. Furthermore, he follows up this apocalyptic timeline by stating there will be 40 years where the rainbow does not appear, immediately followed by 40 years where it is seen every day, culminating in a great flood.
He also provides a definitive end date for the entire human story. He states in his writings that humanity is currently in the 7th millenary, And in Quatrain 49, he indicates that the world will end in the year 7000 when the sun will consume the earth and resume its undisputed sway.
Year 7000.
And Roberts, operating as our 20th century interpreter, also gets into the timeline game, keeping on his reading of the text.
Oh, does he?
He steps away from interpreting the past and makes a specific prediction for the future. Roberts writes that in the year 2025, China will absorb almost the whole of northern Russia and Scandinavia.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because we're sitting here today talking to you on April 27th, 2026.
They are.
We can look at these hard numbers with total hindsight. We lived through 1999, and the King of Terror didn't fall from the sky.
Thankfully.
The 40-year drought without a rainbow didn't happen. And last year, 2025, came and went, and China definitely did not absorb Scandinavia.
They did not.
So, sitting here in 2026, we know definitively that these specific testable timelines failed. When the hard dates collapse, does that invalidate the entire text? Like, should a modern reader just toss the book out? Or is there still some underlying value to these prophecies?
This raises an important question about the actual utility of prophecy.
Okay.
The enduring value of Nostradamus isn't found in literal chronological accuracy. It's found in his deep understanding that human history is cyclical.
It repeats.
Exactly. If you step back and look at the broader text, you see Nostradamus returning to the same grim themes over and over. He constantly writes about plagues, famines, floods, and the rise of tyrants.
It's pretty bleak.
Very. In Quatrain 57, he uses the gruesome imagery of a bloody mouth swimming in blood. He understood that human folly inevitably repeats itself. Because the baseline of human nature doesn't change, a prophecy written about political betrayal, mass conflict, and disaster will always, eventually, feel incredibly relevant to whatever generation happens to be reading it.
Because there's always a new war brewing. There's always a famine. There's always a political betrayal dominating the headlines.
The actors change. The Holy Roman Empire becomes the Axis powers. The cavalry becomes the tank division. But the fundamental mechanics of human conflict remain identical.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That is why a 16th century poet, intentionally scrambling his words to avoid a heresy trial, can write something that perfectly describes a 20th century amphibious landing craft to a traumatized man reading the book in 1946.
So what does this all mean? Why do you think we still read this stuff? I'm talking directly to you listening to this deep dive right now. Why are we still fascinated by a guy sitting in the dark with a brass bowl of water over 400 years ago?
Great question.
I think it boils down to the fact that in a world of total information overload, surrounded by chaotic, terrifying news cycles, we just desperately crave order.
Yes.
We want to believe that someone, somewhere in the past, had a map. We want the reassurance that the chaos isn't entirely random, that the story was already written down.
It is a search for meaning amidst the noise. Even if the script Nostradamus wrote is terrifying and full of fire and blood, the mere existence of a script implies that there is a director. It implies that humanity isn't just careening blindly into the future.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today, building on everything we've unpacked.
What's that?
We've talked extensively about how Nostradamus wrote in deliberately confusing riddles, dark and abstruse sentences, to protect himself from the powers of his day. And we've seen how people desperately project their own modern anxieties onto his obscure text.
Right.
Consider our modern equivalent of this dynamic: predictive AI and complex algorithmic forecasting.
Oh, that is a fascinating parallel. We've essentially replaced the astrologer with the algorithm.
Right. Today, we base our entire global economy, our political polling, and our social planning on the predictions of machine learning models that operate inside a black box.
Nobody actually knows how they work.
Exactly. We feed them oceans of data, and they spit out highly complex, opaque forecasts that even their creators barely understand. Are these modern predictive models simply the new Nostradamus?
Wow.
Are algorithms just giving us a high-tech version of dark and abstruse sentences that we ultimately just project our own modern biases, fears, and hopes onto?
We traded the brass bowl, the divining rod, and the astrology charts for server farms and neural networks.
Yep.
But the fundamental human impulse, the desperate need to stare into the dark and demand a concrete answer about tomorrow, is exactly the same.
We are still just sitting in the dark, waiting for that slender flame to leap out of the solitude. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.